have covered routing and routing parameters using ngRoute in previous videos. In this video, we are going to see on how we can resolve routes. So when I say about resolving routes, we also need to understand what exactly is resolving first. So let us see how routing works in general, that is without resolving at all. Imagine I have an Angular application running at the browser level or say client side. And there is a request to the application to switch to a new route, say from a button or through any other user interaction. Once ngRoute receives a new request, the first step it does is actually changing the URL in the browser. So which means we are going to see a browser URL change, and prior to changing this URL we are going to see a couple of events raised in this order. That is, the first event which gets raised is location change stat, and immediately after that we are going to see route change stat. So once these events have been raised, then actually the change of the browser URL will be taking in place. The next immediate step is going to be jumping to the new route or loading the route related templates. So prior to jumping to this new step, it is going to raise another event, that is after changing the URL and before loading the route, which is called as location change success. So immediately after change URL, we are going to see location change success, and after this event, our ngRoute will be trying to load the template related to that particular route and somehow try to inject into the ng view of our main view template. And the next step is going to be executing the controller or associating the scope with the respective controller of that ng view along with that route template. And prior to going to this step, it is going to raise one more event called route change success. So we are going to see all of these events in the same order. The first thing, location change stat, next the route change stats, then location change success, and then route change success. Once all of these steps have been successfully executed, then it goes to the normal workflow of the Angular application, which actually works through the controller and the scope related information and so on. So as part of this controller logic, probably you can have a couple of AJAX operations which will be actually working with a web service in order to fetch some data. And once the data has been fetched, usually you will be associating or assigning that data to the scope variables. And in fact, once you have the scope ready, all of your view related template elements will be usually bound to the scope and they get refreshed upon getting the results from the web service. This is the typical general workflow on how routing works. The only difference is that in the routing especially is you are going to redirect to the route, changing the URL, and loading the new route. So once these three steps are finished along with the respective events, the general and the normal workflow of Angular will be kicking in. Okay, now let us see how the routing workflow really works with resolve and what exactly is resolve. Again, the same case, we are going to have an Angular app application running at the client side, and there is a redirection request to a new route, just like the previous one as in general routing. And again, the same step, you can see the second step is going to be change URL, and prior to changing the URL in the browser, we are going to see those two events firing. But there is a difference in the next step. Instead of loading the route, in this case, it is going to resolve or say execute something related to the resolve. So as part of your routing configuration, you have an attribute called resolve. If you don't provide that member, it actually follows through the general routing workflow. If you happen to provide the resolve member, it tries to evaluate that resolve member prior to executing or loading your route. So again, before executing the resolve or evaluating the resolve, it actually raises the event location change success. So as part of this resolve, it is going to do all kinds of AJAX operations, or if there is anything to do with the data which is supposed to be ready before even jumping to the route. So all the data will be made ready and made available to the route even before jumping to the route, which includes all the AJAX operations as well. So once the AJAX operations are completed, we are going to receive the results or data out of it, and once the data is completely ready, then it is going to actually load the route, and from loading the route it actually goes through the controller and association of scopes. And again, you can see route change success is actually always going to be raised only after a successful loading of a particular route. And in this case, you can see the loading and jumping to the route always happens regardless of any kind of workflow you are working with, and the workflow further goes down the line in the same fashion as of executing the controller and associating the scope, data binding, and so on. The only difference in the resolve part is if your routing configuration includes a resolve member, it actually tries to evaluate the resolve member, which might include a couple of routines which actually go to web service to fetch the data. And this is an if, that is, it may or may not happen. But the whole idea of resolve is to get the data ready before even jumping to the route. Here in this case, we are not actually fetching any data here. However, the data will be fetched after once the controller and the scope is respectively ready. So we are not going to load the data upfront. We are going to load the data once the controller is ready and the scope is ready. But in this case, it doesn't even load the route, no template, no controller, no scope is going to be ready, but we are getting the data ready first and then proceeding further on. And this is important. Once it resolves, it actually gets some data through AJAX operations or through your business calculations or whatever. So where does that data reside? Actually, ngRoute is smart enough to actually maintain the data till your controller gets ready. Once your controller gets ready as part of the workflow, then it actually passes that whole data, whatever it has fetched or manipulated or somehow computed, and all that data will be actually sent through the controller. So the resolved results means nothing but whatever the data which has been prepared in order to send to the new route will be actually injected into your controller once the controller becomes ready. And once the controller is ready, then the normal workflow goes on. That is, we are going to have the binding to the view using the scope and so on. And as this injection is already in place, all the resolved related data and the results will be automatically made available to the controller. And from the controller, you can actually assign to the scope, and once it is assigned to the scope, you can have the scope to be actually bound to your view in the form of read-only or even read-write or whatever the way you want it. So that is how a resolution for a workflow works in general. So the most important point is that you need to have the resolve member in your routing configuration. Once that is done, we are going to have a couple of evaluations in the form of AJAX requests. That is only if you are trying to go to the web service. And the outcome of this operation is nothing but the resolve related result. And that result needs to be injected into your controller and associated through scope in order to get it bound to the view. So this is a typical workflow with resolution and without resolution here. So in simple, if you are not resolving, you are saying that jump to the route first, get data later. So you can see we are jumping to the route first and we are getting the data later. And if you are thinking about resolving, you are getting the data first and then jumping to the route and pass that data, whatever you have received through resolving, to the new route. So these two are the only differences between a general routing workflow and resolution oriented routing workflow. So let us jump through a couple of examples. Okay, so this is a small application which is very similar to whatever I have explained in my previous video. Let us quickly test this application and see how it's going to look like. So once I go back to the browser, this is how my application is going to be looking like. So we have something like a header and the left panel which is supposed to show all the links so that we can switch to various routes, and the moment we click on the respective link, it switches to the respective route, loads the routing content into this body which is nothing but our ng view. And based on the routes we are going to switch, it is actually going to raise all the respective events of the routing itself. And in this case, I currently hooked up start and success related events, and we are going to see all the respective messages here. So I clear all the responses, and the moment I switch to a new route, you can see those events again are being fired, and at the same time you can also see it has downloaded the route related content, which is calc.html in this case. And you can also see the browser has gone to or switched to a new route, that is calc. And this is a simple routing application where the user can provide some information like 10 and 20 and click on add. The moment I click on add, it actually communicates with a web service which is currently running behind the scenes and has been developed using Node. So you can use any web server or any web service in whatever the platform you would like to develop, but in this case it actually just gets in touch with the node-based web service. So the goal is that once I click on add, it is supposed to do some kind of computation at the web service level and return the output in the form of some kind of JSON or text or whatever, and we actually bind that result directly to our view. So the moment I click on add, you can see it is actually displaying the progress message, and once it has successfully completed the request, it is going to return back the result as 30. So you can see in this case it has actually gone through a special URL called localhost 8000 API add. So this is where it is actually trying to communicate with the web service, and at the same time it is doing the operation add with those values 10 and 20, and in return it is returning 30. So once that 30 is returned, we are actually binding that 30 to the view using the scope, and thus we are having the value 30 here to be shown in the form of a different route as being configured here. So you can see this is a different route when compared with the previous route. So let me clear everything, and if I go back to home, you can see that is the root route, and once I switch to calculator, this is calc route. And at the same time, if I am providing some values like 20 and 30 and click add, then it is switching to a new route, and at the same time it is going to show this message loading while it is trying to load from the web service. And once the web service returns the message back to my application, I am going to remove that message, that is the progress message, and then display the value out. Okay, so this is a typical workflow how we are going to see in general as part of routing. But now our case is different, as because we really wanted to see on how the resolution or the resolving of routing workflow works. So I switch back to my application, and just a quick overview of my application. Here I have a data service which actually communicates with the web service here, and I have the calc. So this is the one which actually displays A and B with that text boxes and the button and so on. And this is my main view, that is the main markup which actually shows the layout, and this is the link which actually goes through our calc.html, and in return it is supposed to display the result, which is nothing but calculated result equal to something like whatever the computation it has done from the server, and prior to that it is actually showing the message loading, please wait or something, based on whatever the values you set up at the scope level. And all of this code is already in place and has been explained thoroughly in my previous video. And the goal is now to actually work on resolving routes. So as part of the resolution, I would like to add a new computation. That is, instead of add, I would like to add something like multiply. And I would like to have this multiply to be working in the form of resolving routes. So in order to achieve that, the first thing is that my data service should have the multiply operation. And currently the multiply operation is already supported as part of my web service, and all I have to do is just add the multiply method to my web service related client. So which means this is how I'm going to communicate with my web service. All I'm doing is going with the multiply endpoint of the web service. So once I'm done with this one, I'm going to switch back to calc.html. And this is where I need to have one more button for the multiply. And instead of writing do add, I am going to say multiply here. and I am going to say the caption as multiply here. So this is pretty much what we can say about calculate HTML, and then I need to go to the calculate controller, which is here, and this is the previous operation which actually does add, and in the similar fashion I need to achieve multiply as well. So I'm just going to expose one more method, multiply, which is supposed to be the same as whatever I have provided inside the calculate HTML. So once I click on this button, it is going to execute this guy. So let me save this. So this is going to execute this one, and it has to go with a new route called multiply, and it has to take A and B from the current scope and then modify the URL in the same fashion. So this is how I configured controller, but now the most important thing is to actually configure the route. So we do not have calculate multiply route as expected by this one. So earlier I have add, but now I am saying a new route multiply needs to be made available. So for that purpose I need to add a new route. So I'm going to say when with an object, and this is going to be my route specification. So in this case I am going to say if the route really asks for multiply, and with the values A and B. So these two are compulsory values, which means those are not optional. So in this case I am going to provide all the necessary configuration for this route. So just similar to template, just similar to our add route, I am going to have the respective configuration here as well. So the template URL is still going to be calculate results. Why? Because I just need to display the result, just the result. So I'm going to use the same template, and the controller is going to be different. In this case it will be multiply, which I need to create, and on top of this one I would like to have the resolve to be mentioned here. So as mentioned in my presentation, whenever you are providing the configuration of your route, that particular configuration, if it has got the resolve member, this will be evaluated first. So in previous cases I do not have resolve, so no routes will be resolved. But in this case I am actually providing the resolve member, which needs to be evaluated before even jumping to this route called multiply. Okay, so now as part of this resolve, I would like to have some calculation to be done and return the results out. So I am going to say multiplied or web service result, whatever you would like to say. You can provide whatever the variable you would like to mention here. So this is just a member, and as part of this one I need to say, sorry, this needs to be a function though, and this particular function actually needs to inject our data service and $route. You can also specify your injection in the form of square brackets and so on. For now I'm just going to skip that, and if you're going to skip it, it's not going to work properly as part of your production if you minimize your AngularJS scripts. So in this case I just wanted to explain the concept. So I go with data service and route. So those two are going to be injected. So whenever I say data service, it is nothing but our injection as you did for others. So once the injection part is ready, the first thing is that I need to get the values of A and B which have been passed, and then I'm going to communicate with my web service to get the value out of it and then return that result as web service result. So I'm going to say variable A equal to, I'm going to use route, which I explained in my previous video, .current.params.a. So this gives us the value of A, whatever you provide there. Similarly, you are going to provide B as well. And once you received both of those two values, all you have to do is access your data service and call the method whatever you have in place. So hopefully it is the same method whatever I have in there. So I use the same method here and then pass those values A and B. And let us see if it is having A and B. So you can see I have A and B here, the same values you are providing here, and you are just returning it. Now in this case, the ngRoute related framework is smart enough to actually resolve this promise. So actually multiply is going to return a promise. You can see it is actually returning $HTTP related promise here, and that promise needs to be resolved successfully, get the result out of it, and then assign that result to this member called web service result. You can put any variable here or just result or multiplied result, whatever. So this variable or this member is going to have the result which has been successfully resolved by this multiply operation, whatever we have in place. So do not expect that the promise is going to be returned to result. It is not going to return the promise. It is actually going to resolve the promise, get the result out of it, and that result is going to be assigned to this member result. And this is what I'm calling it about resolved results in my presentation. So if you go back to my presentation, I was talking about resolved results. So this arrow is what I'm talking about. So this contains the data which has been successfully retrieved from the data service. And you can have multiple. For example, if you would like to fetch some other data from some other web service, you can still do that here. So in this case, this could be something like result 1 and this will be something like result 2. But I do not have that multiple operations here, so I just work with result in this case. So I just go with result. So this is pretty much I have as part of the resolve. And the other part what we are missing is the calculate related multiply controller. So I need to add a new controller, and I'm going to add it right here. And I am going to add that with the same name as I have in place. And in this case, I would like to use the scope. And I need to get the results. So if you go back to my presentation, you can see I'm saying that the resolved results is going to be injected right inside the controller, which means you need to inject your resolved results into the controller. That is essential. Otherwise, you are not going to receive those results which have been resolved. So what is the variable we have in place? So this is the member result. So I use the same variable or same member, whatever we have in there, right inside the new controller what I'm designing here. And this needs to be injected, so I actually place it here in this fashion, and I'm going to say function, scope, and result. So this is going to be my function all the way. So this is how my controller is going to look like. So this is important. So if your member says a different story, like multiplied result or something, you need to inject the same here. So that is pretty important. Where is that? Right here. And this could be any variable, whatever you would like to have. So once I have all of this in place, the next thing is that I just need to assign that particular multiplied result directly to my scope. So I'm going to say scope.result equal to multiplied result. Sorry, I'm using result variable. So let me use the result variable right here. So if you're confused, just use the same variable here and just use this here. So why I'm using result here? Because my calculate result really works with the member called result. So that is the reason I'm actually assigning to the scope value result. So let us see if everything is working fine. So I go back here and I go to home. I refresh this and let me clear everything. I go to calculator, and of course this has not been refreshed yet because I'm supposed to see multiply. So let me go in here and refresh this once again and probably clear the browser cache and refresh it again. I go to calculator and now I should be able to see multiply. So let me clear everything. Now I provide 10 and 20 and click multiply. So the moment I click on multiply, you can see it has said change stat, and it is waiting there, and it has successfully completed it, and I am returned with 200. So what is the difference between our add operation and multiply operation? So let me go back and retest it. So let me do it with 1 and 2. So that is 10 and 20 here. So observe carefully. The moment I click on add, the first thing is that it has already switched to the route and showing the loading message. And then it has shown the 30. So I go back here. The same thing, I am providing something like 1, 2 and provide multiply. So 10 and 20 and provide multiply. Now it is just waiting here. It is not showing any progress. But once it has done, then it is actually showing the result of 200. So there is one difference there. It is not showing the progress that it is doing something. That is one thing to remember. Next, let us go back here. and clear everything and do it once again. This time we are going to see a different one. Once I click add, you can see it has switched, it is loading, start and success are done, but later we are getting the result. I go back here, I clear everything. Now I go to 1, 2, so that is 10 and 20. Now I click on multiply. This is done, this is not working, and success is not done yet. So the success is going to be raised refund only if it has successfully gone to the respective route and loaded the routing template and so on. So here in the case of resolution, the success comes later on, which means the routing happens later on as explained in my presentation. The route related loading will be done only after the completion of successful resolution, but in this case the loading occurs first. So I go back here and we will test once again. So I'm going to 1 here, I'm going to do 2, click add, it jumped to this loading, success is already there, and then we are going to have the message clear. I'm going to see 1 and 2 here, clear everything and click multiply. This is done, this is not loaded, and this is not success as well. Later on this is loaded along with success together. So those are a couple of differences what you have seen there. So as mentioned, resolving means it actually tries to fetch the data first, and once the data is available then it actually proceeds to the route. So let us see how we can fix a couple of things here. First thing is that I would like to really see the progress message here. That is, imagine I don't have the developer tools, but if I'm doing something like 10 and 20 here and click on multiply, the user will be still seeing on this one, staring at it, what it is really doing, and no one ever really knows if it takes 30 seconds that it is really doing something behind the scenes. So we need to show something like loading message, whatever we have shown earlier. So in the case of add, it is pretty obvious to the user that it is actually doing something, as because we are showing this message. But in the case of multiply, we are not showing any message, even though it is really working hard behind the scenes to fetch the data out. So the moment I click on multiply, no message shown, no progress, nothing. But once it has done, then we are getting the result. So I would like to enhance this a bit so that we can really show some kind of progress message to the user. And for that, I am going to modify my application. So in this case, I would like to say calculate HTML, which is having our text boxes and the button. So essentially you are modifying this one, which actually shows a tiny box here or tiny message or label which says something like loading, please wait. So let me do that right here. I'm going to add a new div here, and this is going to be showing if and only if I provided is loading equals true. So which means I am expecting a member is loading to be made available to the scope, and if the value of that member is loading is set to true, then only I am going to display some kind of message that is loading, please wait or something. So in this case I would like to display that one as a span, and the style is going to be green. The message is going to be loading, please wait. So nothing much special here. So I'm just displaying this div if and only if this member is loading is set to true. And where do I set it? So currently if I switch back to my AJAX, we are actually doing our AJAX operations right in the resolve. But inside the resolve, you do not have access to the scope. Even though there exists a scope member inside the current through route, it is going to be set to undefined. So you do not literally have the scope in order to access and provide some information in the form of is loading. So where do I provide this is loading, and how do I get that scope? And in simple, there is no simple way to get the scope as part of the resolution. But we have our events. So we can have access to our rootScope inside our events, and using the rootScope we can provide the member is loading, which will be automatically made available to all of the children. So in this case I am going to say $rootScope dot is loading equals to true. And similarly, once it is successful, so which means the routing has been completed, then I am going to set this one to false. So even though this member is loading is available at the root scope, it is available to all of the child scope, because every child scope, or say every scope or every controller related scope you have in your application will be somehow inheriting from the root scope. So if you define a member inside the root scope, it is automatically made available to all of the children if they do not have that member. If the child scopes have the member is loading, that will be overriding whatever we already have as part of root scope. So in our case, the scope doesn't have is loading, so automatically it is supposed to inherit from our root scope. So let us see if this is working fine. So I go back here and I go home. Let me clear everything and just refresh this, and I go to calculator, and now I provide 10 and 20 and click multiply, and now you can see I have the progress message, something like loading, please wait, and then it is actually showing the message. So if you keenly observe, there is one difference here. That is, in the case of add, we are actually jumping to the new route and then showing the message followed by the result. But in the case of multiply, we are actually not jumping to the new route, but showing the message right here in the same route or the same view, and then jumping to the new view to actually fetch the data, sorry, not to fetch the data, to just show the data. So there is a difference on how those messages are being shown in both of those cases. So that is pretty much important to actually note ourselves. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, I said is loading is available globally, which means available at the root scope. So which means it doesn't necessarily be made available only in this ng view. It can be even available at this left panel or header or wherever you really want it, as because there will be only one root scope for your entire AngularJS application, and it is available globally. For instance, if I would like to have is loading to be shown here rather than here, you can still make it, or you can have at both locations. So let us see if I can make some tiny change to our markup, and probably inside the header. So I would like to create a new div here, and I would like to say something like pull left, so that I display my header in the left corner, and I am going to display the message in the right corner. So I am going to say this one as pull right, and in this case I am going to get whatever I have in place. I am just going to get this guy right here. So this will be shown if and only if is loading equals to true. So I don't need a HR tag here, just let us remove that, and let us quickly check if this is working fine. So I go home here, refresh it. You are not going to find any difference here. I go to calculator. Now I provide some values and then go to multiply. So the moment I click on multiply, now you can see it is available at both locations because it is available globally. But once is loading is gone, then you are actually removing that message from here, and also your route automatically, because you have jumped already to the new route. So that is the quickest way on how we can provide loading or progressing messages while you are actually trying to do some kind of resolution to your routes. Okay. Now the next one, that is, what if your resolution results in an error? That means you are actually trying to accomplish some kind of data, which means you are trying to figure out or fetch the data using a promise and get the result out. What if your promise really results in an error, which means due to communication or probably business logic or whatever? So there is no guarantee that your promise is always going to be successful. There are situations where it can turn into errors as well. So let us intentionally turn our particular promise or our AJAX request into a particular error in a kind of a business logic way. So in this case, I would like to add then with the result. So which means once the AJAX request has been completed, the response is going to be made available as part of result, and that too as part of the member called data. So this contains the multiplied value of A and B. So it could be 200 or 300. This contains the data. So if that particular value is greater than 200, I would like to reject. So which means I would like to raise an error or say the promise is not successful, for example. So for that, I am going to say return $q.reject. So which means what I'm saying is that please reject this promise, or say show a kind of rejection message or an error. So in this case, I would like to provide a rejection error message, something like cannot have result more than 200. So this doesn't make sense, but just wanted to make sure that I'm actually rejecting in a couple of scenarios, and I'm still going to return the original result if I have no problems. So which means if the product of these two values is greater than 200, it is going to show an error. If it is not, it is going to be returning the value successfully. So in this case of result, that is returning just the value whatever it has been returning from the AJAX, it should be working the way we are already working with. But in the case of this one, it is not supposed to work, and instead it is supposed to show an error. Let us see how this one really works. Before even going there, I am using $q here, so we need to inject it right here. So let us do this and let us see how it is working. Of course, there are a couple more other things which I need to accomplish or do, but prior to doing those things, I just wanted to show on how it is working. So I go in here, I click on multiply. It is still 200, so it should work fine with no issues. So you can see it is saying load, please wait, and we got 200, and we have start and success, no issues at all. So let me go in here. Now I'm going to say like 20 and 30 and click multiply. So it is trying to load something, and in this case it has returned 600. It is not supposed to return this. So let me check what I have in place for, probably it has not refreshed our scripts. So let me go to our A01S and let me see the result. So you can see it doesn't have my latest modifications, whatever I did as part of this. So I don't see this whole part. So I don't see that right here. So probably I just need to refresh the browser cache. I go home, refresh everything, and now let us go back to A01.s, and now you should be able to see the return with all my logic. So this should actually give me a better understanding. So now I go to 20 and 30. So let me clear everything. I click on multiply. It is waiting and waiting and waiting. So let me go to the network requests here. Let us see the 30. You can see it has returned 600. However, the calculate.html, it doesn't look like it is waiting. It is waiting forever. So there is no way I can figure it out like it is raising an error. And how can we know that? The only way is actually hooking up another event called routeChangeError. So in this case, I am going to say something like error, and I am going to display this error, and the message whatever we have in place whenever you are rejecting, that is this particular message, can be automatically shown here by actually adding one more parameter called rejection. You can use any variable here, or whatever. So I can use that message here, and I can say something like message, and at the same time, this is important, is loading needs to be set to false, otherwise it will be showing that loading message forever. So this is important. So let me see if it is working fine. So I go here and here, I refresh everything, I go to calculator, let me press 20 and let me press 30 and click multiply, and it is showing loading, waiting for a couple of seconds. And now you can see the messages are gone, but here it is actually showing routeChangeError, and this is the message we have in place. It worked. We are able to reject the request, so which means we are able to capture the error and show that error as part of the console. But no one really works with console once it is in production. So this is only a developer tool. And here in this case, we are just saying loading, and once it has loaded successfully, it is actually showing the result. But if the load itself is failed, then it's not going to show any message here. So we need to show some kind of message here, and for that purpose I'm going to modify this a bit in this case. And not only that, there is one more important thing. Can you see this? It has actually jumped to a new route. That is also important. So let me go back and explain that one too. So I go in here, I provide 20, I provide 30, and click multiply. You just observe this one. I click multiply. The first thing is that it has jumped to a new URL, and even though it says it is in a different route, it doesn't really refresh this route. So we need to get back to the previous route, which is usually this calculation. So we need to switch back to the previous one once it has actually failed. That's the first thing we are going to address. And next we are going to address the message on how we can really show it on the screen. So here I am going to use my route. So that is, I am going to say there is something like current, which is actually explained in my previous video. I can use this message, that object current dot route dot original path equals my routing. So in this case, if my original path is literally equal to this guy, then I would like to simply go back to window. So which means I'm just going back through the history. So that is, you have the history always made available here. So I'm just saying that please go back to my previous history item before we have switched to that route. That is important. So as we are working with the window, we need to inject that. So I need to inject route right here. So I'm going to use, not route, window here. So let us see how it works. So I go back to calculator. Okay, let me refresh this. And now I go to calculator. Now I go to 20 and 30. Let me clear everything. So also observe the routes here. So I go to multiply. It is trying to load. It has already switched to the new URL, and it has shown an error, and immediately it has switched back to the previous route. And once it has switched back to the previous route, again the new route has been started and successfully completed. So in that way we are actually switching back to the previous route if there is an error. And this is not a quite clean way to do this, but there is no proper way either. So we have to somehow mess with existing objects on what we have in place and somehow get to the results in whatever the way we want it. So there is no standard way or a very useful pattern or efficient way to accomplish this. We have to somehow hack it around. So this is pretty much on how we can really work with the URL whenever there is some kind of an error. But we did not deal with the error yet. So we need to deal with the error. So in this case, I would like to have the rejection also to be actually assigned to the root scope. Just like is loading, I am actually doing that as part of this one. So I'm going to say error equal to rejection. And that too, I don't need that here. I really need that here. So if there is an error, I just would like to make sure that it is always multiply, get the error out, and then go back to the history. However, I need to use this error somewhere. So in order for the error to be shown, I do not want that to be shown in the main markup, but instead I would like to show in the calculate.html. As mentioned, you can show anywhere because you are literally writing to the root scope. So in this case, I do not want everywhere, but I just would like to have only inside the calculate.html. So for that one, all I have to say is ng show if and only if I have something like error member, and I would like to say something like style equals red, and I don't need all of this stuff. I'm going to say please display error if you have that. So this error is the member which is expected in the current scope, and if it is not in the current scope, it goes all the way to the root scope and checks if it is there, and if it is there, it actually pulls the message out. So let us see if I can get the message properly. So let me refresh this whole thing, and let me clear all of this stuff and click on calculator. Now I get 20 and click multiply, and now you are going to see loading first, and if there is an error, so there is no error because we are still working with 200. So let me switch to 220 and 30. Let me clear everything. So this actually gives the value greater than 200, and it is supposed to show an error. And now you can see I have the message saying that cannot have result more than 200. You have the loading gone, and we have the new message. However, the values are gone here. So it is up to you whether you really wanted to maintain the state of this particular route previously before jumping to the new route. But as I mentioned, currently I'm working with rootScope because there is no other way around to really make this one work. So this is not a clean way, and there is no professional way either. You have to work with other special monitoring service, or you have to somehow maintain your own state in one way or another, or you have to use rootScope, or you can use some global state, or your browser storage or whatever. But even though there are several options, there is no particular Angular way of really accomplishing this, and that too in a very standard way. So this is pretty much about resolving a particular route, and at the same time getting the data during the resolution and passing it to the controller, or you can also raise or you can cancel that particular route and get back to the previous route again and show the error message if there is a problem.